Baba has said, "I am the ocean of love, so whatever you do with love pleases me." This line contains the word which predominates in our talk or get-together this evening, pleases. A short passage from a letter written from Bhopal, India in 1939 and signed by Baba to Kimko of the English group read thus: "Realize me and you will know God. No other pursuit is worthwhile after you have met the Beloved. Everything then centers around Him. You see all beauty through Him, and your only attachment is to your Beloved. All service then becomes selfless, whether done for friend, family, or stranger. All are one, and towards this one the motive too is one. To please Him whom to please is to know. There is no other knowing. To please Him whom to please is to know." I must explain that word Kimko, which is often referred to in letters and books. And also when I say we, it refers to this small group of the first followers of Baba in London who came to be known later as Kimko. It was in this wise. Ali, a young Persian boy who came with Baba to the West in 1931, and although he knew us by name, when Baba would send for us and we arrived at the door, Ali would go into Baba and just say, "Kim and Co are at the door." Now Co referred to Margaret Cross, Delia de Leon, Minta her sister, Mabel Ryan, and myself. In course of time, Kim and Co became simply Kimco. Now, one other fact about Kimco: Baba told us many times we were of his circle, just as he told some in the United States that Jean Co were of his circle. Now, we are not here to talk of the circle tonight. However, in 1933 in Kashmir, Baba did give a most interesting account of the formation of the circle, which we took down very accurately at the time, and in due course it will appear in print. And Baba mentioned it too in Venice, but this I will say later. Now, in choosing tonight as our theme to please, I am not unmindful of other aspects equally important in discipleship, but time only permits us to talk on this one subject. To share with you this one experience, I must start with a story not new to some, how I came to Baba, for it was these early years with Baba that set the pattern and changed the day of our responses to Baba's love, revealed very specifically in his many ways of pleasing us and keeping us happy. Isn't each contact or awakening with Baba a step to happiness? For Baba has said that when we gain God, permanent happiness is gained. All other forms of happiness are fleeting and changeable. And this real happiness must be very strong to enable one to support all the suffering that comes to one, that Baba has to bear. And so, how did I come to Baba? 6 months prior to Baba's visit to the West in 1931, my brother, a medical student, heard quite casually of a spiritual retreat in North Devon, England, run by a Mr. Meredith Starr, who had recently returned from India, where he had been living in the ashram of a very well-known spiritual teacher and master, Meher Baba. My brother decided to journey down 4 hours by train from London and inquire further. And I had been ill and needed to rest outside of London, so maybe this place was the answer. And he learned from Meredith Starr that Meher Baba, after keeping him 6 months in India, told him to return to the West and find a suitable place where he, Meher Baba, after a year or so, could visit with a few of his Indian disciples. Meanwhile, he was to try and interest others in Meher Baba's message of love and truth and his work. My brother returned to London from the retreat in East Chalicum very much impressed with all he heard about Meher Baba. And a week later I went down, and there were talks on vegetarianism, spiritual awareness, reincarnation, the plains, etc. The threat of a world war that Meher Baba had said would be soon. And I learned, too, that Meredith believed Baba to be as Jesus. Now, it's important to remember that Meredith's star was the first link Baba used for his contacts with the West, both England and the United States. That first night, Meredith showed me my bedroom. On the wall was a picture of Meher Baba, and Meredith said, "If you see a bright light shining on the picture, do not be frightened. It would be a good sign." And true, I did see a light, the moon peering through the window. No, I was just not ready. I was content, so I thought. But my brother and I being very close, I decided to go along where his interests lay, and he had visited India in the past and knew something of Eastern thought and Eastern philosophy, and so was much more prepared than I. 3 months later we both paid a second visit to the farmhouse retreat. Margaret Crask, Will and Mary Beckett, Charles Purdom and others were there, drawn for various reasons, but all strangers to one another. Margaret and my brother were told to meditate 4 hours daily in preparation for meeting the Master when he should come. I was not included for obvious reasons. And then on July the 17th, whilst we were there, came a cable from Baba from Karachi saying, "Love calls me to the West. Make preparations for my arrival." A year earlier than Baba had originally stated, and all were thrilled, and Meredith was radiant with joy. On the appointed day, September the 18th, Meredith and my brother left for Marseille to meet the steamship Rajputana, on which Baba and 3 of his mandali were travelling, and bring them to my parents' home in Kensington, London, for 1 night. In Vol 1 and 2 of the Awakener Journal, I wrote up the full account of this meeting. Briefly, I was to meet the party at Victoria Station, London. Margaret Crask was to remain at home and see the food was cooked and ready. And Herbert, my brother, telephoned me from Marseille, happy, arriving 4 p.m. London. And to Margaret he telephoned, "You have never seen such a being." Now this was interesting, because the day before he had said to Margaret, "Is he the one?" Now it so happened that travelling on the same boat from India were Gandhi, his secretary, and Miss Slade. This accounted for the large crowds at the London terminus, and looking everywhere on the platform, I could not see our party. The train had been divided into 2 parts, and I just had time to rush to another platform to see Baba step off the train, followed by Meredith, Herbert, and 3 of the mandali, Rustam Irani, Chanji, and Ali. A slight figure in a pink turban tied loosely around his head, an imitation chinchilla brown coat, and white flowing garment underneath, and sandals. He stood very still, but eyes darting in all directions, absorbed, and Meredith introduced us, and we shook hands. The party went ahead in the first taxi, and I was left to follow in another taxi with Rustam and the luggage. And I recall Rustam, R.D. Senior's elder brother, saying in the taxi, "What else is there in life but God? We are all one, East and West, in this search." Baba in the first taxi was driven past the important sights, Buckingham Palace, the government buildings, the Foreign Office, etc., so that even Baba's shadow might be felt in this powerful locality as it was in 1931, with the threat of war between China and Japan. And later the taximan remarked, "That was a remarkable gentleman. I felt it was a privilege to drive him." Arriving at our home at 32 Russell Road, Kensington, Margaret Crask, spying the taxi through the window, was at the door to meet Baba, her first meeting, and to take him up 3 flights of stairs to the top floor. I arrived shortly after with Rustam, and found Baba already seated, and he had begun to eat. He motioned to Margaret and to me to be seated, and made the sign that meant he was pleased, and handed us each a grape, which was our first prasad. Very little of the food we had prepared was eaten, except for rice, of which we had to cook a second serving, as there was not enough. Baba then retired to his room, returning shortly dressed in long white trousers and the sadra, looking very beautiful, and his hair loose. I noticed a slight tear in his garment, but I said nothing. Immediately Baba, reading my thought, told me through Meredith to fetch a needle and thread, and with rather shaky hands I mended the tear. And Meredith's interpretation, that this was the beginning of service for Baba. A few private interviews followed. Margaret Cross was the first to be called. She says that she sat there for 1/2 hour looking at Baba, and said to Chanji, who was standing by, "Does Baba mind me looking at him?" And Baba answered, "It was your love that brought me." I came next. I was impressed with Baba's long hair, his kind face and manner. And I spoke of my brother leaving for China for the League of Nations assignment within 5 days. And Baba knew I was worried, and spelt out on his board, "Don't worry. I am sending him to China for my work, and I will see no harm comes to him." After dinner we sat for an hour, and we played our favourite records for Baba. Bach's chorale, "I Call Upon Thee, Jesus," some Negro spirituals sung by Paul Robeson, steal away to Jesus," "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and "I Hear the Lambs a-Crying." A never-forgotten memory, so beautiful and moving. We all felt something, or why should we have chosen these particular songs? In Marseille, Baba had told my brother that Meredith was placed in charge of his work in the West, and therefore he should continue to work under Meredith's instructions. And my brother felt somewhat sad at this, because he was already drawn to Baba. But a few days later, when Baba called him to his room, he said, "From now on you are to follow me and to work under my direct orders." And he was overcome with intense joy and happiness, and this happiness was marked by all when he came back to the study. And as we left for bed that first evening, Baba turned to Margaret and to me and spelled out on his board, "Are you worrying? Are you happy?" And said, "Baba, be happy. Don't worry. I will help you." Next morning all were up before 5 a.m. for an early start to the retreat in North Devon. Breakfast was rather a silent meal, and Baba asked where my brother was, and I was sent to find out. He was upstairs rather flurried and worried, trying to get all the bedding rolls, etc., tied up for an early start. And Baba had said to me, "How can he work for me if he gets so worried? Tell him to come down." 7 a.m. and all ready in the car to start. And just as Baba was about to step into the car, he turned to me on the pathway and spelled out on his board, "Is there anything you want?" I replied, "Yes, Baba, 2 things I have desired, an increased capacity to love and an increased opportunity to serve." As an afterthought I said, "and spontaneous goodness." And Baba said, "You will have both in a few days," and told me to come down to North Devon in 3 days, in other words, on the Tuesday. And Margaret tells me that Baba also told her to come down on the Tuesday, to which she answered, "It might not be possible, Baba, because of my dancing school." To which Baba spelt out on his board that she was of his circle, and from now on she had to obey him implicitly. Hence she must come down to Devon whilst he was there. Here is a touching account that was in the journal of those few days in the retreat at East Chalicum with Meher Baba. Quoting, "We sat with Baba for nearly 3 hours, 7 to 10 p.m. Wednesday evening, at the bottom of the garden, and the sunset colours were dying, and the moon and the stars were out. Margaret's star was crying for love, not sadness, and all were sitting at Baba's feet. And in those early days Baba would frequently ask us by signs what were we thinking of. Of course he knew, but we had always to tell him, and he would do this 3 times in a minute. We felt very near to him, and when he felt we had had enough, he would get up and say good night, tell us to go to bed and sleep well. To my brother he said to keep very close to him this last day before leaving for China. On Wednesday he called him to his room at 6:30 a.m., giving him instructions about his life in China. He said, "I will take you out of all of this," said Baba, and my brother, interpreting it, thought he meant to take him out of Naja. And not once but many times Baba kept on telling him, don't worry, leave it all to me." And Baba gave him the pink turban he had worn on the boat and during the last 4 days, and also an orange to eat on the tray. And my brother wrote me later that he ate the skin as well. And that same Wednesday afternoon, Baba took 6 of us down to the beach, and we played cricket. And how he made us run! He bowled us all out, and even so he was so careful that 1 or 2 of us did not overdo it. And how wonderful Baba was with the younger ones. This time, Zilla, my niece of 14, and Ali, the young Persian boy. And how at ease they felt and enjoyed the fun. And Baba did it all to please, but working all the time in his own way. And he suggested an Indian game called 7 tiles. And this consisted in setting up a pile of stones, one on top of another, and trying to knock them all down with a ball in one throw. And as we played, all shyness and aloofness melted in the playmate. The teacher was forgotten, and Baba's predominant desire would seem to have been just to please and to see us happy. And then suddenly Baba's mood changed, and he beckoned a few to follow him, and he led the way to a rounded stone a little distance away. And he sat down, and he bade the others to sit on the ground in front. My brother, writing of this, says, "Tenderness, compassion, radiance, and love flowed from him, and love flowed towards him. Time and place dissolved. Thoughts of tomorrow were brushed aside. It was an extraordinary experience. It had the qualities of pure love that seemed to be Baba's most precious gift." And then quickly Baba's mood changed again, and he soon had us all running along the path that zigzagged up the steep hill, picking wild flowers to give him, and he held them as though they were rare and precious, as he was to do 30 years later, not with flowers, but with shells gathered on our walks with him along the beach at the Meher Centre, Myrtle Beach. And next day, the 22nd of September, my brother left East Chalcombe for London, Paris, Warsaw, China. And Baba and Meredith and Zilla accompanied him to the bottom of the lane and said goodbye. I was told to remain at the retreat. And before my brother reached Suez, the wireless reported that England had gone off the gold standard and war had broken out between China and Japan. And I, left alone and feeling sad at my brother's departure, for 2 years at least, wandered off to the top of the hill from which we had climbed to the beach with Baba the evening before, and lay on the grass for an hour or more till the rain came. I felt, too, some peace from that spot and from Baba, and I walked slowly back, and as I came in sight of the house, I saw Chanji coming towards me. Baba had sent him to see where I was. The rest of the house were meditating, the prescribed 4-hour meditation, no doubt, that Meredith insisted on at the retreat, but Baba was sitting on the couch in the garden, playing carom with Zilla and Ali, and we remained together till lunchtime. Then Zilla said to Baba, "But why is Kitty sad?" And either Baba replied, "Because she is happy," or he told me to answer, and I said, "Because I was happy." I can't quite recall. It was anyway at this moment that I was conscious for the first time of a deep response to Baba's pure love. I felt at that moment completely for Baba, experiencing a divine mysterious ecstasy. And that day never sank below my mind's horizon. All thought and action became permeated with or centered on Baba, and I was no longer alone. Such was the impact, echoing day and night in the heart, after 5 days or less in the presence of Baba's infinite love and compassion, expressed in terms that we could then understand of divine love. In the many ways he found to please, to see us happy, to be interested in everything that we did, and drawing us ever closer to him in love. That Baba was this or that, Krishna, Buddha, Christ, had no conscious part in my reactions, for I never recalled Baba using these words until some months later in Paris. Before many days the rhythm of events accelerated. Soul once awakened was followed by a quickening of the spirit. Let me read you from Delia de Leon's experiences of her first impact with Baba, under very different circumstances, in a London theatre, at a performance of the White Horse Inn. She writes, "I sat next to Meher Baba, but he took very little notice of me. I was shy and nervous, and felt as if someone had taken a hammer and knocked me on the head. I hardly looked at him. I heard people talking, but felt dazed and far away. And at the end I put out my hand and took his and looked mutely at him. He nodded his head and told me to come the next day to Kensington. During the week I went about like one in a dream. I was stunned with the wonder of Baba, and nothing else existed for me. I saw him everywhere, and from then on I had absolute and implicit faith and trust in him. I asked no questions. I wanted nothing from him. I gave my life into his keeping and knew my search was ended." And Charles Trodden, commenting upon this, says, "This was characteristic of love at first sight." And Margaret Krask, whom you all know, also of Kimco, one of the circle, wrote of her experience in 1932. "On looking back to that first visit to East Chalicum, we see how nearly all of Baba's time and attention was given to a few. Herbert Davy for 2 days, Kitty and Zilla for 3, and now Kim Tolhurst and myself for 4 days. And those 4 days were for me the most beautiful and radiant of all my times with Baba. It was as if the curtain had been drawn aside, and then we were privileged to know and to feel from our hearts who Baba is. And nothing broke this feeling, and during the whole 2.5 years since that time, I have not experienced anything quite like it. We have passed through trials and tests which have deepened our love and faith in Baba, and there is more to go through yet, but nothing has perhaps given the exquisite beauty of those 4 days. On the other hand, it was like the unthinking happiness of the child, and we, his disciples, are growing up a little under the treatment he has given us since, and these first unclouded moments are a wonderful memory, but not a state to be returned to. We have to go on, whatever he wishes, through whatever trials." There followed now a period of 5 to 6 years probation, one might call it, during which, as I see it, Baba was testing our ability to adapt to the opposites, comparative freedom to complete restriction, the luxurious to the Spartan, periods of close companionship with Baba to periods of complete withdrawal outwardly from Baba's physical presence. Baba saw that our first love did not dwindle. The word sahavar, which translated means intimate companionship, an intimacy of spontaneous give and take of love between the lover and the beloved, sums up the atmosphere of this period. Such a simple relationship, one which Baba in explanation would say, "You have been with me for ages and ages, since eternity." This was a period during which Baba was back and forth to the West, England, the United States, calling us at intervals to meet him in Paris, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, and finally calling us to India on separate occasions, in 1933 and in 1936. Baba would plan the days we were with him. He would take us on excursions to the best-known sites in each country we were visiting, to the tombs of the great saints, in Italy to the tomb of St. Francis of Assisi, in Spain to the tomb of St. Teresa of Avila, and to the well-known cathedrals, especially St. Mark's, Venice. And whilst in the East, Baba took us to the tombs of the great Hindu and Mohammedan Muslim saints, to Agra, to Benares, Kashmir, Ceylon. And there were walks and picnics and cinemas and shows. Baba had his work to do, but he managed to do it along with pleasing us. He made it clear that play and recreation were also part of his divine game, and also a part of his work too. Every kind of game, tiddlywinks, marbles, ping-pong, cricket, charades, and throughout the thought, the emphasis was always on Baba. As I mentioned earlier, Baba's moods change quickly, and we had to learn during this period to respond or not respond, as alas happened too often, and one would spoil Baba's mood and miss the spiritual message he was prepared to give. Now this was the pattern whilst we were actually with Baba. What happened when he left us to return to India? Well, for the early years, 31 to 34, Baba would ask us and tell us to write to him every 2 weeks or 3 times a month, and preferably long letters. If we forgot, as we did sometimes, incredible as it may seem, a cable would come, "Is Kimco all right? Why no letter?" And our letters never went unanswered, and replies sent by Baba were written by one of his close mandali and signed by him. And these letters will convey to you a little of how much it meant to Baba to be loved, and to try to do what pleased him, to try to keep cheerful and happy, and how he cared, his constant inquiry into one's health, how one had slept, what one had eaten, how one's work was progressing, showed us how he cared and was concerned with the details in the lives of each one of us. And up to the very end, Mani or Erich would tell you it was the same. Not Baba and his suffering, but what was concerning you. And yes, under all conditions, be happy, don't worry. And he would end, "This pleases me," or simply, "I am pleased with your love." I think many of you know that Baba to please gave Kimco each a Persian name. Delia was called the Faithful Leila, Margaret Zuleika, and Elizabeth Dilruba, I see the name at the back here, which means a stealer of hearts. Norina was called Nur Jahan, Zilla Mumtaz, and myself Saroja, the name which Baba gave to the library down at Myrtle Beach. Now, what was our response to Baba's love and his desire to please and to make us happy? Simply that we too wanted to please Baba and to see him happy. His joy and enthusiasm, interlacing every aspect of our lives, drew out the same spontaneity and enthusiasm in us towards trying to please him, to study his needs, his moods. We acted and did as many of you are doing now, thinking out shows, entertainments, getting together to talk about Baba, writing about Baba and what not, and I am sure, as it was with us to please Baba, so it is with you to please Baba. I am not unmindful of the fact that your work has one side missing to it that we had. We knew that when we wrote to Baba telling him of all these activities, that we would receive a cable or letter from Baba telling us how pleased he was with our effort, etc. I will read you a few of these letters later on, and you will see. But all of you go ahead and do all that you are doing, and know that from within you are pleasing Baba, and pleasing Baba 100%, if in this great work you are all privileged to share in of spreading Baba's love and truth, it can be done in harmony amongst all, then it would please Baba 100%. I once asked Adi how best we could please Baba, and he replied, "No backbiting, no criticism, and to study Baba's moods." At this time there were no books of Baba's to read in English, and Baba would simply say, "Learn to read me, and you will understand everything." Now I found a few excerpts from some earlier letters from Baba on this theme, that of pleasing Baba. In 1935 he wrote to Kimco, quoting, "It is up to you, my beloved ones, who know me in the flesh as none others can, to lessen this suffering and give me all the happiness you are capable of. So help me in thought, word, and action. Let your thought be always of me, your words spring from love, and your actions be expressive of one who seeks in all he or she does to please him who is ever present in the heart. Show your love in the effort you each make to please me." If you could understand but a little of how great is my love for you all, you would feel all was worthwhile if it is to please your beloved. I have not touched the period from 1938 to 52, which was the period I, along with a few other Westerners, were called to India to live on Mehrabad Hill, and which included the wonderful bus tours throughout India, when Baba was working exclusively with the masts, but at the same time was working with the women for the 7 years preceding the 7 years of his universal work. Now this period has been written up in the journals very fully by Dada Chanji and Elizabeth. Suffice it to say that living as we did on the hill, with Baba's closest women disciples, was to live with a group whose only wish and desire was to please their beloved. And it left with me a very lasting impression, for they had learned from past experience and training how to alleviate Baba's suffering and to keep him happy. And I recall one occasion when Baba, talking to us about Plida, an early disciple of his, and telling us how all he did was to please Baba, but not even he pleased Baba 100%. No one, continued Baba, pleased him 100%, but the nearest one to doing so was Mehra. And yes, we lived constantly in that atmosphere of a group who had been with Baba for many, many years, and who to this day are striving in all things to please him, the beloved of their hearts, even though he is no longer physically at their side. And each one of you who has visited Meherabad since Baba dropped his body will testify to this. Their apparent cheerfulness and effort to be happy under the stress of deep suffering within. For Baba has so often told us, the greater the love, the more poignant is the suffering of separation, tending more often to moods, which of all things Baba has asked us to control and overcome. And their simple desire in their making every effort they possibly can, as they say, well, they know that it would please Baba not to see them weeping or distressed. Now I said I'd read you, before I come to the conclusion, a few letters of that period. Would you like to hear them?
Yes.
Now, there might be just a little more hesitation, because I wouldn't read you the whole of every letter, because it deals with other subjects. But I will where it deals on the subject which is naturally out to please Baba. Now, this was written from Nasik, the 28th of February, 1933. And he says, Dear Kimko, Baba received some depressing letters from you all, and hence wired you yesterday to that effect, inquiring how matters stood at your end. And then he received today the air mail containing letters full of enthusiasm, spirit, and love, and was so pleased. Preparations are going ahead at this end for a hearty welcome to Baba's dearest Kimko when they arrive here. The Indian tour is beautifully arranged with minute attention and care to all comforts for you all the selection of Baba's choice. You have your life's loveliest and most beautiful experience awaiting you here and hereafter. This was just before Baba called us to India on our first visit. He called us for a year, and we got sent back after 3 weeks, back to our old jobs which we had relinquished for 1 whole year and put other people to take care of them, and that was our first test. In the same letter, it says, Baba has already instructed you regarding keeping well and happy during the voyage. Remember, you are to be hale and hearty, all of you, when you meet Baba here in India, and not like ghosts just out of the grave. Try to be as less seasick as possible. Preventing the seasickness by the preventive methods as suggested by Baba, keeping mostly in the open, and on deck, and in the lounge, and not in the lounge, and taking lemons in ice water frequently. Keep some nice dresses with you for tours in India. You know that Baba likes the gopis and loves to see them always on their best, internally with all the love they could offer, and externally too in the best appearances, both in dress and mood. Let us see who has the biggest surprise for Baba, and who pleases him most. Remember, it is to the grandest experience and thrill of your life, with the best beloved on earth. And Baba signs this. Kimco should include in their suitcases for travelling around India some of their best dresses. Tell Shalimar she should use all her wits to dress and look smart even in India. Now that was in February 1933. This follows the next month. Dear Kimco, so you are all off from the west to the east. Dearest Kimco, going to Baba, to India, to China, and then through the Orient to the land of your dreams, Hollywood, with Baba, to hear him break his vow of silence, to witness his manifestation and see the world come to him in humble submission and surrenderance, with love and longing. To be in India, the land of saints and sages, with the master of masters of all ages, to visit beautiful places like Kashmir, an emerald set in pearls, as the poets say, and there to be in the world's most wonderful gardens like the Shalimar, the Garden of Delight, to be in the Himalayas, to see the Taj and other places that Baba has planned for you. And I am sending you herein a typed copy of the description of the places of interest that are fixed by Baba for visit with his dearest Kimco. But even while dreaming of all these and many, many more things to come to you in the future, please remember, all of you, that you are to go to Baba with a cheerful disposition, a dancing heart, full of hope, spirit and vigour, physically and mentally, and quite prepared every way to enjoy thoroughly this tour planned with him. You know quite well Baba doesn't like depressed or despondent spirits, long faces, dramatic poses, or expressions of misery or unhappiness, and so on. So you have to take great care of your health on board, and to remember every word that he has already instructed you, to avoid heat and prevent seasickness, being most of the time on deck on the ocean. And I wish you all a very smooth and pleasant trip. And then the rest is not so much upon our own subject. Now comes January 1934. Again for Kimco. There is little left to tell you all collectively, as I have written to each of you individually, except that I am so anxious to see you and to be with you, and am trying to bring about the happy reunion as early as possible. For I know how you all miss me, and feel separation so keenly, and I don't want to see you suffer separation more. The reunion is sure to come, whether the picture is produced in the East or in the West. You have to work with me, and either I shall have to come over there, or you shall have to come over here. We have to work together, so that with the picture, reunion is a certainty too. I appreciate the feeling of harmony amongst you all, my dearest gopis, all feeling in harmony with each other as of one loving family and fraternity, in spite of petty differences in opinions and tastes, which so often causes a rupture in the ordinary life. I want you all to be always like that, as members of my own loving family, and help the work with the combined force of all souls put together in love and service for me. And I am so delighted to know of the Christmas gatherings that you are all having, and my love to all those who originated and organized it, and also to all who came there for their love for me. Signed M.S. Irani. Baba used to sign himself always N.S. Irani. So now I will go on to the short third part. The present. I will read a short passage from the God Man, a conversation. Naja Baba says, "To ask me how I can love you is to insult love. How can I answer? What is your answer, Harry?" And Dr. Harry Kenmore answers, "Thanks for putting me in this predicament. One cannot be told how to love. One must pretty much find out for oneself. Such a question denies love on the part of the lover." And Baba said, "Had I told Peter how to love me, Peter would not have denied me. I can tell you how to obey me, but there is no answer to how to love me. Love me in the way you understand love." In the early days that I have spoken of today, love was to me a very conscious experience, entering the realm of feeling and emotion, but expressing itself in that spontaneous desire always to please Baba. Has there been change through the years? Yes, expressed in that line of Ramakrishna, one loves most when one is least conscious of loving. And Baba says that whilst feelings are good, love is different. Love is silent. But whether one is conscious or unconscious of love for Baba, the spontaneous desire to please Baba has grown stronger and more important as the years go by. Occasions arise when obedience and surrender do not always enter into a decision of the moment, and one is left with a choice of whether it pleases or displeases Baba. And Baba has laid down very clearly through his example, his messages and his books, just what does please him. And knowing the choice is what would please Baba gives tremendous joy and happiness and peace within. So let none of us feel worried if love, or rather the consciousness of the same, fluctuates, or that you feel you are using hold of Baba's daemon, as some feel who come to me. Don't worry. Continue in big and little things to try and please Baba. And Baba is always present to help, and since Baba tells us that love and faith are gifts of grace and cannot be taught, isn't it feasible that the very act of pleasing, in the way you understand love, and let us recall the line, I am the ocean of love, so whatever you do with love pleases me, will reawaken that seeming dormant love. And remember, you cannot lose what once Baba has given you, however far it may seem to sink deep within and for you to be unconscious of it. You cannot lose what Baba has once given you in that awakening. To quote Eridge, he says, obedience is a terrible affair. I thought it easy to love and obey, but I found I could not do it. And Baba says, I have already told you that love for God and obedience to a master are beyond the reach of man on his own, and that complete surrender is almost impossible. So what can we do? Quoting Baba, make all your thoughts subordinate to your resolve to please me with all your heart. Now the following short passages of Baba's may help as guiding posts. Quoting, to please me is to do, says Baba, but doing what? That which your beloved commands you. This is my way, my path with you all, the shortest way to union, which I long for infinitely more than you can ever long. And in a personal letter to Delia in 1938, remember Maya is my shadow, so indirectly is me too, and is the means by which the goal, divine though it is, but unconscious as yet of its divinity, must become conscious of its oneness with God. Herein lies the riddle of the universe, and my game too. And how can you keep this game of mine, or how can you help in this game of mine? By love, by service, by control of your mind and moods, and yes, weaknesses too, which are there for the purpose of exercising control over them. Often the greater one loves, the greater the tendency to moods, because the pangs of separation are more acute. But I do not like moods, and therefore to please me, which is one of the best ways of showing your love for me, try your best to overcome them. Learn to accept things as they come, quietly, without worrying, and much of the insecurity that is unnecessary will disappear. And a year later from Bhopal, Baba writes, realize me and you will know God. No other pursuit is worthwhile after you have met the beloved. Everything then centers around him. You see all beauty through him, and your only attachment is to your beloved. All service becomes selfless service, whether done for friend, family, or stranger. And all are one, and towards this one the motive too is one. To please him whom to please is to know, and there is no other knowing. I already told you that, didn't I? And to come much later on to the family letters, to which many of you are familiar, I found this in letter number 29, 1959, 20 years later, quoting, Baba gave certain instructions for those not staying with him in the ashram, and to the men and women in Pimpledown, that none should go outside of Meherazad during the 3 months whilst he was in seclusion, and all should keep Baba happy, trying their utmost to do what they knew would please him. And on another occasion Baba told his mandali, "There is no compromise. Either you please yourself or you please me in the littlest thing." And to go further back, searching in the Bible, I looked in the concordance to see whether that word please came in at all, and I found it in one of David's Psalms, Psalm 69. Made me think a little bit of what Baba has said in Beams, quoting, "I will praise the name of God with a song, and will magnify him with thanksgiving. This also shall please the Lord, better than an ox or bullock that hath horns and hoofs." And I think we're all familiar with St. Matthew, the 3rd chapter and the 6th verse of the baptism of Jesus by St. John the Baptist, quoting, "And lo, a voice from heaven saying, and this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Some of you may remember this line of Rick Chapman after he came back from India, and he gave a talk in Myrtle Beach, and I think he may have said the same at other talks. And he said that Baba said to him just before leaving, "Forget the spiritual path, forget the planes, forget God realization, and breathe Baba." And I like to say, forget the spiritual path, forget the planes, and forget God realization, and please Baba. And finally, there's Baba's message from the 12 ways of realizing me. If you have that love for me which St. Francis had for Jesus, then not only will you realize me, but you will please me.